Just, just so long as it works. So we just have one empty. Is that correct?
No, there are 5 empty.
I only found one empty.
No, did you open both?
Oh, there was another one. Sorry. It was in this one, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those say blank.
Okay. Is it live now? We begin with the praise of Allah Ta'ala. We ask and beseech Allah to send His peace and blessings upon His final messenger, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and all those who follow his way until the Day of Judgment. So Alhamdulillah, we're beginning the beginning of the end for our session and the reading of the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah. As you guys know, Alhamdulillah, each of these Hadith, as I've iterated before, are, they're just they're basic foundational hadith and the comprehensive understanding of our religion. So naturally, we don't have enough time to get to all of the details of the fiqh and the aqidah and all that stuff. So Imam Yusuf Rios, rahimahullah, hafidahullah, he's gracious enough to give us some reflections, and that's really the essence of what we're trying to take here, is trying to connect the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the reality of our world, so that it's relevant, that the hadith and the tradition stays relevant. So inshallah, and maybe if Allah allows us and gives us life, we'll have other opportunities to go into more detailed discussions of the 40 hadith. But inshallah today, with Allah's permission, we will be completing the reading of the 40 hadith, inshallah. Those of us who were present, whether they listen to the hadith partially or fully, they will receive an ijazah of sama'ah. The ijazah of sama'ah is an ijazah. It's a permission or it's a certification that you heard the hadith from someone who's connected, who heard the hadith from someone, who heard the hadith from someone, who heard the hadith from someone, and that goes all the way back to Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah. And Imam Nawawi's collection, his collection is known, and it goes back all the way to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's an honor and it's a blessing for us to continue this tradition of staying connected to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we should feel honored that we had the opportunity to do so. So without further ado, inshallah, we will pass it to our Sheikh Yusuf Rios, inshallah, to continue with the reading of the hadith.
Last time they said that they couldn't hear you.
Okay, so I can grab it while I'm doing the reading. Okay. Bismillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. We are on hadith number 31. عن أبي العباس سهل بن سعد السعادي رضي الله عنه قال: جاء رجل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال: يا رسول الله، دلني على عمل إذا عملته أحبني الله وأحبني الناس. فقال: ازهد في الدنيا يحبك الله، وازهد فيما عند الناس يحبك الناس. حديث حسن رواه ابن ماجه وغيره بأسانيد حسنة. Imam Nawawi says, rahimahullah, on the authority of Abu al-Abbas Sahl ibn Sa'd al-Sa'adi radiallahu anhu, who said, a man came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, O Messenger of Allah, direct me to an act which, if I do it, will cause Allah to love me and the people to love me. So he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, renounce the world and Allah will love you, and renounce what the people possess, and the people will love you. This is a Hasan Hadith.
There, does it say? Does it say? Let me see the Arabic. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. The issue of zuhud, right? A lot of times, like when we talk about the term tasawwuf, we don't see that there's no real basis in the Quran and the Sunnah for the word itself. We find the word zuhud is mentioned. Some people say ihsan. Right? There's indications that the whole issue of purification of the heart, or the spiritual discipline, so to speak, that's legitimately found in the Quran and the Sunnah. The whole debate revolves around the term. Imam Ahmed rahmatullahi alayhi, from the 4 Imams, he wrote or compiled a book on zuhud to show that from the earliest times it was a practice of the scholars to talk about the spiritual discipline. But we have to understand that from here comes a lot of debate with regard to what does this mean, outside of this basic practice. Here, zuhud is defined as doing without the world, then Allah will love you. And what it means is that leaving that of the world for which one has no need, even if it is halal, and to confine oneself to sufficiency. And so each word in the Sharia has its own meaning, and this is very important when we start talking about the issue of revival of the deen. One of the Shaykh of Azhar, may Allah guide him to what's right, he used to say, that you have a concept. How is it that you come to a concept? You come to a concept by having terms, and those terms, they work together and they form a concept, because those terms have a relationship to one another. Like, so here we have the term zuhud, we have the term wara. So scrupulousness, they translated it as scrupulousness. So those things together, when you bring them together, you start to have this whole idea that is formed from these terms. So when you have these ideas or concepts that they come together, which are rooted in terms, give you, some sort of fikr, so to speak. The idea is that once you have that concept in relation to another concept, which is another set of terms, they come together, and principles, and then from there you have a science. And that's the general rule, whether it's engineering or chemistry, or whether it's hadith scientists or tafsir or whatever. You have terminology. The terminology works together on the principles, and it forms a concept, and then you have a series of concepts that are governed by principles, and that's how you develop, what we call fikr. But this issue of the zuhud, not only is it essential, but it has become an issue of contest. Contest meaning issue of debate. You had the Salafi da'wah at one point in time trying to initiate reform. And so one of the things that took place, especially in the American Salafi da'wah, was a rejection of anything that talks about the heart. Not all of it, of course, but there was a dominant strain. So sometimes the Sheikh Muhammad Shanqiti, rahmatullahi alayhi, they translated a lot of his stuff. He would talk about the life of the heart, and talk about, having hope in Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, or taking time out for dhikr of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, right? Or, things that develop you spiritually. And so some of the brothers would come and say, this is Sufism, and exit out, because they took the label of Sufism as being everything that's, wrong and bid'ah and problematic in the deen. We have a principle that we go by we don't get stuck necessarily on terms. We go by the meaning. So if someone says Sufism, we don't immediately exit out. We ask, what do you mean by that? We know it's controversial, but we ask, what do you mean by that? Right? If you mean X, Y, Z and is in conformity with the Quran and the Sunnah, then okay, we have a conversation. If there's some basis, but it may be like stretching a little bit, but still within the realm, that still falls within, something that's acceptable. You with me or not? But there's extremes in this. The issue, say for instance, this is very personal. Anybody knows that they have children and a family. You always say, do you always just limit it to what's necessary? Your lifestyle. Yes or no?
No.
Right? We have also in the Sharia something that's called the tahsinat. It's like embellishments. Like we had this conversation. I asked, why is that sign not over here with this sign? He said, well, we have this beautiful piece of art here. Well, the beautiful piece of art is not essential. It decorates, it brings what? A sense of culture, sense of beauty, so on and so forth. So yes, some things are not what? Essential. You can do without them, but also it builds life, right? You see what I'm saying? It's like okay, can we manage in the room without some sort of AC? Yeah, we can manage. We can survive. But at a certain point in time, that level of discomfort, what does it do? It begins to take away from our spirit and our energy. So the zuhud, sometimes the zuhud is you deny yourself what you want. It's not necessarily denying everything in the dunya. Sometimes the zuhud, like for instance, some of us, we don't like to go to amusement parks. We don't like to do a lot of things, but we do it for the children and we do it for the wife, we do it for the family. Sometimes there's a da'wah. We don't want to go, but we do it for the family. That we're doing without ourselves, right? It's not what we basically, we're doing without, meaning that we deny ourselves what we want for the sake of what? For the sake of the family and others. Well, I could press the issue. I can press the issue. I'm not going. You know what I'm saying? But that whole issue of the world is not going to function only on what? On zuhud by itself, from the angle of just doing without in the world. Sometimes the zuhud is not in the material sense, but in the spiritual sense, denying our desires. That's the tougher one. That's the real struggle. That level of spiritual discipline and so on and so forth, that has a lot to do with the elevation of our station. That's why, we mentioned before, at a younger age, the more you train yourself to have an understanding of the deen, but not to fall into sin, it becomes easy to maneuver in life. Right? Because then the issue of zuhud having to be applied like medicine. You know what I'm saying? Like in Ramadan, some of us, Ramadan comes like medicine. Right? And for some of us, Ramadan is like candy. Some of the mashaykh, their lives are already in ibadah and everything. So Ramadan is like, we're going to go to a higher level. Now we're going to get dessert. This is on top of everything, on top of the tasty food and the good dinner and everything. You get the metaphor? And then for some of us, Ramadan is like medicine. It's like we're out of whack, we're out of control. So that level of zuhud is a zuhud which is applied to keep us like at the human level, not to bring us back into the human level, because we're so out of control, we're going to the animal level. Right? Everybody's not in the same station of development and so on and so forth. Is it clear what I'm saying? So zuhud is part of the deen. Right? We're taking a little bit of time with this because there's a great misunderstanding that comes. There's a great misunderstanding that comes in the community in this regard. And so people, they confuse terminology. If we're talking about Sufism, we ask what it is. Part of it can include, the issue of zuhud, and it's acceptable in the deen. And then part of it could just be practices which are maybe not, are seriously problematic. Right? But, the issue of society, do you go to 7-Eleven? Sometimes you go to the store. There's a lot of stores around here. Technically, we can probably function with 1 store, 2 stores. So the economy is not going to move. You see what I'm saying? If everything is just tightening up, right? You see what I'm saying? If everything is doing without in the world, the halal realm is halal. This got the students of Imam Ahmed into a big problem, because the student of Imam Ahmed was very self-disciplined. He was a zahid in the dunya.